Thank you, Gwen. We're very grateful to the panelists who've agreed to come at quite short notice to address the club tonight, looking ahead to one of the most extraordinary elections in Thailand's rich and varied history. All of you will know the circumstances under which this election is being held. I had to write a piece for the BBC this week trying to explain it to people, and I went back to the time that the coup happened, and we were in fact addressed as the foreign media within a couple of days of the coup by one of the coup leaders, and he simply explained to us, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, this is the coup to end all coups. In other words, he said, we screwed up in 2006, we didn't go far enough, this time we're going to do the job properly. And we knew then, at the very start of that coup, this was going to be different, it was going to be tougher Thai style. I mean, this is not tearing your toenails out style dictatorship, but it's certainly a lot more restrictive than previous dictatorships and been a lot more long lasting. And as part of that, although they never really acknowledge it, we all know the goal was to destroy the political movement loyal to Thaksin Shinawatra, as well as to secure a royal succession. The first part the military has done successfully. The second part, I would argue, probably hasn't gone as well as they'd hoped. We're on the brink of the election, and the military's own vehicle, the Palang Pracharat party, has not been polling well. So we do have, despite a constitution, some would say rigged, certainly weighted so much in favour of the military and against Pheu Thai, we still have an element of uncertainty, certainly in terms of exactly how the seats will fall. So it's a fantastic time to have this discussion. We're very privileged to have, I'm going to start on the right with Chris Baker. I hesitate to say he needs no introduction, but I don't think he does to anyone at the club. A very distinguished historian and writer of many books on Thailand. Next to him we have Ajahn Anuson Uno at Thammasat University, who's also, during the last 5 years, among a very distinguished group of a list of academics who've fallen foul of the military's restrictive rules. I think he told me he's had 2 charges filed against him for violating the military's ban on groups of more than 5 people. Next to him is Paul Chambers, who's a professor at Naresuan University in Pitsanulok, but any of us who follow Thailand will know that Paul is one of the best informed people on the inner workings and dynamics of the Thai military, and thus absolutely invaluable for anybody who follows Thailand, and I would say from my own impressions, a remarkably bold commentator too on what all those different military internal conflicts and moves mean. And then on his left, a fellow board member, Tiranai is a journalist on Khalsot English. Anybody who enjoys an irreverent take on Thai everything will enjoy Khalsot English. And if you look at the byline, Tiranai's, Tony we call him, is pretty much is amazing. His byline's on about half the pieces there. We often wonder how he can keep up. Sometimes you see 3 pieces in a day. But he has had as an opportunity in Khalsot English, which does allow itself this irreverent look, an almost unique view on Thai politics. And he's going to talk tonight about what it's been like for the media. I'm going to start with Chris. And I think, Chris, you've got a PowerPoint presentation to give us some historical perspective, though I thought we might be getting a bit of a horticultural theme there when I saw your picture. If you'd like to start.
Can I have the PowerPoint back? I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold.
This morning I was very deep.
It's getting better, so I hope I can be heard through the fog. I think this is, as Jonathan has said, this is a wonderfully exciting election. I've been here for several, and I think this is the most exciting. And it's most exciting because, frankly, we haven't got the faintest idea what's going to come out by next week or whenever we know the result. When it was called, we thought we did. We thought, okay, the junta have fixed it. They fixed it so, Prayuth can come in. They've allowed him to campaign for a whole year while stopping everyone else. It should be a cakewalk for him. But as of once they released the political forces, we started to understand that the keenness about holding this election and participating is simply enormous. 11,000 candidates. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And we cannot tell what's going to happen because it's been 8 years since the last completed election. We have 7 million new voters. Been very little political debate in the last 5 years. The polls are all over the place. And anyway, surely we have understood now that all over the world, these polls no longer work as well as they once did. And at least half are saying, you want more? Okay, at least half, around half, are still replying to the polls, I haven't decided yet, which may mean I'm just not telling you at all. But I think the key to understanding this election is that the voting is going to be more emotional than rational. Why should that not be? After all, we've seen Trump and Brexit and Macron. They're essentially very emotional results of elections. So why should that not happen here? So it's great that we have all these parties with their slogans out on the street and their party programs, and we have had forum and television programs for the last 2 weeks in which the leaders are coming out and talking about all kinds of detailed policy matters. I think this is great. But I actually think the way the votes are going to fall are going to be more emotional than rational. So what I'm going to talk about is 4 ways, which are 4 things that I think are going to shape the voting in this election. I have no idea how to weight them, but I think these 4 are important. The first is kind of rational, and the other ones are more emotional. Now, this is the result at the last completed election in 2011. You can see how stark the result was. The blue is the Democrats, who won the South and the West and a bit of Bangkok. And the red was Pheu Thai, who won the North, the Northeast. Right? But what I really want you to see in this is the other bits, the bits in the other colours. Because we have this area here in green, yes, which is around Suphannburi. We have this area around Buriram up here. We have this area around Chonburi and so on. This was places where local parties did better than the national parties. And we have to remember that, MPs are not only legislators, just like MPs in UK or congressmen in the US, they also have a kind of surgery function. That if you as a citizen have a problem with the government, with the bureaucracy, you go to your MP to help out. And that is very important here. It used to be very, very important here because there was very little legislation. And so and also because you have this very centralized, very arrogant bureaucracy, which is very difficult to deal with. So if you in your locality, you wanted to get anything done, like transfer a piece of land or register a business, you would come up against some bureaucrat who would not move the paper until you paid him a bribe. So then you had to find someone to get round that. And this meant that you had people who became politically important in the localities because they were rich, because they had a lot of connections, because they were tough guys and had a lot of charisma. And we used to call them godfathers. And they kind of went away in the 90s and the 2000s. But I think they're going to come back again much more in this election. Because why they went away was because Thailand introduced elective local government, local councils. And that meant these could get things done locally. But this junta has abolished those local government. Right? This means that the bureaucrats in the locality are back to being really important again. The provincial governor used to be a god, but once you had this local government, he was reduced for cutting ribbons for opening gas stations, and he's now back to being a god again. And for that reason, I think this voting for the local parties will possibly increase this time round. And these local parties, and the ones that we see here, are actually still there. This is Phumjai Thai, which is here. This is Banhan's party, and so on. They're still there. They're still there. And they stay out of the major parties so that they're able to bargain with anybody. Okay? And I think that will be an important part of the voting. Okay. The second thing that this will happen in this election, inevitably, is it will be a vote on the military. Whether you like them, whether you approve of what they have done, whether you want them to stay. On the very first day that campaigning was allowed, this poster went up at the end of my road. and it really knocked me back. It has the headline of "Cut the arms budget, reduce the number of generals, stop conscription, and use all the money for welfare." In Thai political times, this is like blasphemy. To go up against the military as strongly as this is quite extraordinary to have done. And this is from the Anakot Mai, the Future Forward Party. And it kind of set the agenda for the election, because we know what happened was that the army chief came out and threatened them with violence, and that poster disappeared in the middle of the night, replaced by another party's poster straight away. But this debate over the military became important from this time on, and I think it's going to be a significant factor in how people vote in this election. The third thing is Thaksin. And for this, I have deliberately chosen some old and fuzzy pictures. One from his fans and the other from his haters. And I've chosen the old pictures because now he hasn't been here for a long time. He's kind of become insubstantial, right? He's no longer, as it were, a human figure in this election. He's like a spirit who lives in the cave on a mountain long way away, but still has enormous power. And he has been allowed to, he has continued to be so important. And in fact, the junta have made him to continue to be so important. By blocking political activity over the last 5 years, they've prevented the emergence of new leaders. So people still think back to Thaksin. So when you talk to a taxi driver in Bangkok over the last few months and you say, you know, who are you going to vote for? You say, Thaksin's party, straight away. Why should I do anything else? He is the only person who has ever done anything for us, the only leader who has ever done anything for us. That may or may not be true, but this is now into the political mythology. So the hate for him and the love for him are now totally mythologized, and it means he will continue to have a big impact on this election. The fourth thing is the generation gap. And you may, if you've been traveling on the BTS, you may have seen these wonderful ads, which are about the generation gap. And they sort of work like this. When they come on first time, we see an older person and a younger person in an argument. But something's wrong, because the older person is backing liberation and freedom and self-expression, and the younger person is all in favor of discipline and obedience and hierarchy. And then the grabber cranes come down and swap the heads round. And then we realize that the idea of the ad is, could be the future, right? But now we're still in the past. I think this is very, very powerful, because the generation gap here at the moment is very strong. And it's based not just simply on age, which of course is the same in all societies, but also the fact that people grew up in completely different worlds. The people who run Thailand in every single way now, who are in their 50s and 60s, at the height of their careers, they grew up in the Cold War. They grew up when Thailand was a part of the Third World. They grew up being taught that communists were bad, that you had to fear the mass of the people because they were dangerous. And you felt you were in a country that was very remote from the center of the world. And then, suddenly, it all changed. The foreign investment flooded in. The foreign tourists flooded in. Thais started going out in much larger numbers as travelers, as students, as migrant labor. Incomes went up. In Asia, the rise of China, J-pop, K-pop, Korean soaps created a kind of cultural confidence which hadn't been there before. So the new generation grow up in a very different world. And they think of themselves much more of being modern and being cosmopolitan. And this sort of big change that happened here, it sort of happened in the 80s and 90s. And if you just take sort of 1990 as the key year, if you were 18 in that year, and I take 18 as being the sort of time when you come of age and you form a lot of your mentality for the rest of your life. If you were 18 then, you would be 47 now, right? So the age gap is somewhere around there. If you're below the late 40s, you're somehow part of a new Thailand, which is very different from what you had seen past. Now, the kind of ripples of this generation shift have been coming for several years. But during this junta time, this 5 years, they've been backed up because this junta has been intent upon driving Thailand back into the past. And as a result, what is now happening is that the waves are slapping against the dam. And obviously that was the reason, that is the reason that the Future Forward Party has done, seems to be doing better than many people thought. When it was first announced, when the election was first announced, it was treated as a kind of novelty, as an entertainment act, not really important. They maybe get 5 or 6 seats. And it's now beginning to look much more important than that. So I think there are various factors leading on here. We thought it was going to look like a cakewalk, and now it's beginning to look much more complicated. Still, it may be possible to get General Prayuth in to be Prime Minister, but would he have enough votes behind him to have a majority in the lower house? And could it actually happen on polling day that he got so few, it was humiliating? And I think these are all possible now. We don't really know. But there's a kind of hint there. Just last week, his campaign came out and published this picture. Now, we know that he looks like this. He doesn't look like a B-grade gigolo. And they also, at the same time, came out with a huge policy program saying they were going to raise the minimum wage, they were going to cut taxes, they were going to have support for agrarian prices, A, B, C, D, E. Which, of course, is also nonsense, because we know it's nonsense, because they're all the things they haven't done for the last 5 years, so why should we believe them? But what these two things suggest is that they may be panicking, right? That someone has said to them, you're going to lose. You have to do something desperate to try and get yourself back on the track to performing in this election. And of course, if you panic, if they're panicking, then they're dangerous. So what might they do? I don't know, but it's quite worrying. Thank you.
Fabulous stuff. Thanks very much, Chris. We're all enjoying the new General Prayuth, the soft and comfortable look. Ajahn Anuson, we'd love to hear your take now on the parties and how they are adapting well or not so well to this unusual environment and unusual constitution.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Please excuse me in advance because I have not been prepared much when compared to Ajahn Chris, because a lot of things happened over the past few days. But anyway, I try to conceptualize the things that we talk over in the next 10 or 15 minutes. I try to conceptualize this coming election as part of the third challenge to the restoration of the conventional political order. Back to 1992, after the Black May incident, it seems like Thai society has a consensus to be under the guide or the king or the benevolent king. It seems like all factions in society, be they the people's movement, be they the capitalists, be they the political parties, be they the military, all the factions in society seem to have the consensus, being under the guidance of the benevolent King Bhumibol. But things, didn't go smoothly as the ruling elite expected. Because of what? Because of we have the first challenge to the conventional political order. The first thing I call is the challenge from the upper. or we have the emerging, ruling elites, in particular those from the telecommunication business, you know who I'm talking about, right? And plus we have like, what we call the politics focusing on policy, which, we didn't have right before that. It comes to, the competition, among political parties when it comes to the political campaign that they launch, the policy to, make an impression among the voters. And it turns out that, they won the landslide victory in the election. And then he became the, the populist leader. What it means to the, ruling elites is that now it's, they have like the competitor, because now you have the benevolent ruler, right? But now you have the populist ruler, will try to compete, it's like, with the old, the ruling elites. And then what we have is the, the first batch of restoration measure. The first batch, what they have is what they call, and I think if you follow the Thai politics, and in particular in academia, we may be used to the terms judicialization, right? That, like the emergence of the Constitutional Court. We have, like, many independent organizations which are aimed, to like, deal with the, new or emerging leaders, and in particular the new political parties that become popular among the people. The first thing is that we have like the judicialization. And the second thing, we have political movement like Yellow Shirt movement or the PAD, right? The PAD, you have like, the Chinese descendants, who, present themselves as the ones who rescue the nation. We have a slogan like the Chinese descendants rescue the nation, or the Chinese descendants love the king, and they aim to like topple down, the political parties, and in particular Thaksin, who present himself, in comparison to the king. And there's a rumor that he wanted to, launch a new political, regime, instead of the constitutional monarchy. He will launch like the presidency or something like that, all right? Although it's proven, all things are wrong. But this is the thing. The second thing, you have like, the people's, the political movement like the PAD, try to restore, the conventional political order. But this is like not successful. It's not successful because, you still have like those in power. And then we have the challenge from below. We have the challenge from above, or we have the new emerging ruling elites, the elites from the telecommunication business. And then we have challenges from below. Challenges from below, we have the new emerging class, the lower middle class, right? Because these groups of people, they are the consequences of changes in politics, and in particular in economy in the rural area. Now they were no longer, farmers as we know, right? In like, as we fancy them to be. But they became, not only that, the agricultural sector is, diverse, but, there are also diversity in the, village economy. And also these people, they were like, have experience in the so-called decentralization. Although the emergence of the Obotor or the Tambon administration, right, it has something, to think about in terms of corruption or efficiency, but at least it's the first time that people feel that, they can have, their voice heard. And also they have a channel through which they can use the budget, to serve their needs at the local level. So they are get accustomed to this kind of politics. And also we have, in the, 1990s, we have, the rise of the people's movement. And in particular, we have the grassroots movement in terms of, environment, in terms of rights, and in many things, related to the people's movement. Yeah, and this, and it's like the emergence, between, what the populist elites, deliver to the voters, and what these, emerging classes, demand or dream about. So it's the big emergence between these two things. That's why they became, the supporter or the defender of, the Pheu Thai party that were, sold out by the military coup in 2004. Okay. And in 2006, I'm sorry. Yeah. And that's, yeah. That's the second phase. And then it came to the third challenge. The third challenge is that although the military coup in 2011,
2014, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know
2014, I'm sorry.
Western Buddhist
Yeah, in 2014, succeeded in suppress or in disperse, the political movement, be they the PDRC or the Red movement or the UDD, right? But anyway, there's still some, remainders of those who are dissident. And also we have new groups of people, and for example, students and also political, social groups, which came to the forefront instead of the in the semi-organized political movement. And we have this. But anyway, yeah, plus this, in combination to the remainders of the dissidents, they still have, one of the challenge, and the third one that I'm talking about is the election. At first, they don't want to have the election, but this is the game that they need to play. Otherwise, they need to close the country. They have to be, alone in this world, which is not possible. So when it came to, and what they learned from the previous military coup, which, to some they said is a useless coup because they can't get rid of the populist leaders, or they can't get rid of the political party that they thought threat to them. Because, with that election on the 3rd of July in 2014, right? 11, I'm sorry. In 2011, we have, the coming back of the Pheu Thai party, right? Which the leaders of, Yingluck. So for those who try to restore the conventional political order via the political coup, thought that this is a useless coup, and they use the word เสียของ right? In Thai, they call เสียของ. So for the first time, for this time, this is a new challenge, and they think how to make this one, this game that they need to play, and they, need to be a winner, or how to make this game, or how to make the military coup, not useless. So what they came is this. When we need to play the game, or in other words, this is how they try to restore the conventional political order via the via the democracy. The first thing is that to make advantage, or to have the upper hand over their competitor, which I think has two stages. The first one is that, at first they thought there will not be a player in this competition. It means that they try to take control over those who play in the game. They try to take control over the politicians and over the political parties. For example, we have the constitution that is aimed to weaken the political party. There will not be a landslide victory because they don't want to have another populist leader. And the second thing is that they try to weaken or to make the voice of the people meaningless. Because the reason why you have like the populist leader because because the voice of the people matters. So this is how they they try to make the voice of people not matter as it did before. So they tried, and so many things in the constitution they try to do. That's the first stage. But when they realize that perhaps it's not enough to take control outside, we need to be one of the players. So now it comes to the second stage of making advantage, try to have the upper hand over the competitors. What they did is, the first thing is that you suck, you do it, right? The former politicians of the political parties that you once accused, corrupt politicians, something, anything, so many things. And you also use like the prosecution. You also use the threat against the, if you didn't come to, be part of the party, we will, set you up, or we will prosecute you on some counts or something like that. We will see, some people said that the reason why he subscribed or being a member of the Palang Pracharat party because he, tried to protect his father from being prosecuted. So this is the thing that they use, in try to make advantage or try to be an upper hand over his competitors. And
can I ask you just to wrap up, Ajahn, if that's
okay.
possible, please?
And also, they try to make advantage from being a government. For example, they form, they have like the former ministers forming, a new political party using the name of the policy that, they advertise that is very, very successful, right? And then they also have like General Prayuth, who is now still in power, being, the one that they propose to be a prime minister. This is the thing that they use to make advantage from, over his competitor. And also they try to weaken their competitors. They use, the Article 116 and also the Computer Act. They also use so many things, to weaken its competitors. And also, they try to prevent the outside organization to observe the election. When they try to, some like international organization or some monitoring organization try to observe, the election, they said, no, it's not. It's enough. We don't want, outsider, to, watch the election or something like that. What happened is this, if the restoration measures, successful, what we will have is the government that is not, tied to the will of the people. And we will have the policies that, will benefit, to the capitalist groups that now, in association with the government. And yes, so many things will happen. But anyway, I will wrap up because I think the challenge remains. First of all, a lot of people thought about this election as a new chapter of the conflict that has not ended yet. And in particular, those who were suppressed, over the past 5 years, although they were dispersed, but they wait for a moment that they can bring back their political party or their political leaders. And the second thing is that we have those who were dissatisfied those were disillusioned with the promise of the military junta. One of the reasons why that the military junta gained support from to society is that they promised that they will dispute the conflict to prevent the bloodshed in Thai society. Then they promised to do a lot of reforms. But what happens over the past 5 years is that not only did they not do any reform, but what they did is perhaps more ugly than what the politicians that they accused did. And that's why we have a lot of those people who were dissatisfied. Although the yellow shirt, what we have seen is very interesting. Yesterday, Palang Pracharat Thai party, organized a political campaign. Not more than 1,000 people, attended the event. What it means? You have almost 1 million people over the past 5 years. But now today, you have not more than 1,000 people gather, and listen to the talk of so there were so many people who were satisfied with this. And we also, and these people, cover a lot of the middle class people, which is like a swing, voters. And more importantly, we have a new voters, those aging from 18 to 25. These people you are not part of the political conflict, but you need to bear the consequences of the political conflict. And in particular, need to bear with the measures that the military try to suppress the dissidents. For example, the song, right, that the people, you can like Patet Kumi or something like that. We saw like the rise of the dissatisfaction among the younger generation. And plus that, this is the first time that they have that they will cast their vote. So there were a lot of enthusiasm among these people. Plus, they have social media as a terrain through which they
This was I'm going to stop you there so we don't run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think if I'm not mistaken, there are 7 million new voters, and they're obviously going to be a very big factor in this election. Paul, the military is driving this thing. You tell us what's going on inside them.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Gwen, Annalee, Jonathan, Dominic, everyone, FCCT. Big crowd here. I think in Thailand today, after 5 years of dictatorship, military dictatorship, we see these rising expectations among voters. Social mobilization, political participation. People want change. Okay, it's been a long time since the last election. The last time there was a long period like this of dictatorship between elections, my gosh, it's maybe 30 years ago. Okay, so people really want change. Okay, now the junta leaders are not stupid, though they may look stupid. They are not stupid. They certainly are trying to corral and control the rising expectations that voters have. Okay, and as such, the idea is to create, in a way, a spectacle of this election. Okay. Next week's March 24th, 2019 election could be seen as part 2 of this junta's attempt to entrench its power over Thailand. Part 1 was the coup of 2014. Okay? But, you can't stay in power militarily forever. You have to change your legitimacy somehow. And the best way to do that in the world today is to have a so-called democracy. So part 2 is entrenching the junta's power through the appearance of democracy. So next week's election is an attempt by the junta to stage manage the theatrical spectacle of an election ritual which has been engineered to favor the junta itself as a means of sustaining its sway, its allies' sway for years to come. Okay. But, with voter turnout so high in early voting, with so many people demanding change, participation, rising expectations, Well, Thai people have pent up hopes for a return to some form of democracy. The democracy that this junta will allow Thai people is not enough, I believe, for what the Thai people are demanding. And we can certainly see that in the talk, the pronunciations of the candidates like Thanathorn, like in Pheu Thai party, who want changes in the military's influence, who want changes in the Constitution. Okay. And so an election and election victory are necessary for this junta. They really are, because if the junta's leaders need to satisfy those who demand democratic legitimacy from a regime which came to power out of the force of a gun in 2014. Also, the junta leaders are trying to guarantee the persevering political and economic influence of the military establishment, the so-called Part 2 that I talked about a second ago. Okay. And in a way, if they can persist in extending this influence, then the junta leadership could create a new military elite that could be very powerful in Thailand for years to come. Also, the junta's victory at the polls, should they win at the polls, would, weaken the voices in civil society who would question military influence. But I think most importantly, and I think Ajahn Anuson talked about this, the junta is seeking to resume the military's political party control over parliament, which was last cut short in May of 1992, when the Suchinda government was forced from power. Before Suchinda's government was forced from power, the junta, the military at that time had a lot more power than it did during, obviously, the 1990s. Okay, the period of military influence from the period of 1976 until 1988, and then from 1991 until 1992. This is what the military would like to see. Why? Because at least during the 1980s, under the primocracy, there was some fig leaf of elections at the lower house level, but the military was able to dominate the country. Okay, so the idea of having this Palang Pracharat party, the military's proxy party, this is an old tried plan of the military, starting with Seri Manankasila of Pibun, Sahapum of Sarit, Sahaprachatai of Tanom, Samakitam, Suchinda, and now Prayuth and Prayuth's Palang Pracharat. This is an old broken record. But just as the military junta that came to power in 2014 wanted to make sure that there was never going to be a way for a powerful prime minister like Thaksin to come into power, the military wants its political party to have a chance to dominate the country. Now, the military establishment has a lot on the line, which they intend to preserve from this election. First, of course, a higher defense budget, which is skyrocketed to 227 billion baht in 2019. And that's up from 183 billion in 2014. Protection of military land. The military formally and informally controls 5 million rai of Thailand. That's huge. The military's establishment wants to maintain a lack of accountability for itself. And the enshrined constitutional powers which elected politicians might seek to amend, those will remain off limits to civilians. So, for example, the military's dominance over military reshuffles. To this day, the military controls who gets the reshuffles in the military. An elected Tanaton wouldn't be able to do that. Now, of course, the junta has numerous levers of power to guarantee its advantages before or after this election. So first, of course, they have the monopoly on violence. In the end, the military can always stage a coup. We know that. Apirat's already said that. He said, well, if there's going to be any trouble or demonstrations, if Prayuth wins, well, I just might stage a coup. Oh. Second, a second lever is the Internal Security Operations Command, or ISOC, which is a parallel state, obliquely ensuring a sort of military dominance over mass civilian political activities. It's been in existence since 1965, at first it was countering communism, or what the military said was communism. But then later, after the end of the Cold War, ISOC has been recreated to counter so-called threats to the kingdom. Okay. The military can use ISOC in so many ways. So just to say, there's an ISOC committee at the national level. There's an ISOC committee at each of the 4 regional levels. There's an ISOC committee at every provincial level of Thailand. ISOC includes army, police, other security officials, but it's the army that dominates ISOC. Each level of ISOC is led by a military official. And at the provincial level, the military official monitors the governors. So basically, we have a parallel state, and ISOC can decide what to do if it wants to counter the law. Who is the head of ISOC right now? Well, the head is the Prime Minister, right? The director of ISOC. Deputy director is the Army Commander. Army Commander is really the most powerful person in Thailand today. I mean, we're not talking about number 1. Okay, so anyway, beyond ISOC, this junta, since coming to power, this is the 3rd lever, has come to exert enshrined dominance over the police through law. 4, and we know there can now be an unelected prime minister for the first time since Suchinda. Suchinda, who was an unelected prime minister in 1992, for those who weren't there. Next, E, there is junta control over an appointed Senate, or a semi-appointed Senate, whatever. It's controlled by the junta. Next is the fact that the junta has appointed many heads of so-called independent organizations, such as the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Okay. So hence, of course, Prayuth watches. The NACC doesn't know what to say about those. I don't know where they got them, but it's not corruption. Okay. And beyond that, there is the supremacy that the junta has wielded over the committee for overseeing the 20-year strategy. This 20-year strategy that all governments must adhere to, or they could be ousted. Now, electoral scenarios. What are the scenarios for the future? Electoral scenarios of junta or military intervention. These are fun. First, it's possible that Palang Pracharat will barely win this election with their 250 senators and 126 seats. It's possible. Okay, in that which case we know why, because ISOC was able to probably pour some money into luring politicians from other parties. Now, if that happens, and if people come out to the streets and they don't like that result, well, Apirat, the army commander, has already promised that there could be some repression, like in 1992, could be. Second, if Pheu Thai wins, and there's a chance they could, people have pent-up resentments. There might be a lot of voter turnout, which helps Pheu Thai win. If that happens, well, the junta can discredit the election. Also, the courts could seek to nullify the election. And we know that there's a 150-day period that's supposed to take place from last December up until May 9th. If the junta can find, well, there has to be re-elections for certain seats, etc. Maybe 150 days pass, and then the junta can simply say, well, we're going to be the caretaker. We have to be the caretaker for another year and another election. Okay. C, I would say this, if a small party like Anutin's Boomjai Thai is allowed to, well, if it has enough seats and if it comes down to Boomjai Thai being able to try to form a coalition, I think that might be a coalition that perhaps the junta could stomach. Okay, in that case, you might have 5 or 6 parties. The Democrats might support that kind of coalition. But in such a coalition, it could be like the coalition of Mom Ratchawong Kukrit Pramod, or the coalition of Banhan. How long do these coalitions last? Not very long, probably a few months, or maybe a year. But in which case, the military could still dominate the new government from within, as they did with Apisit's government. Then, of course, finally, there is simply a coup by the army chief, just to carry out ensure stability. And this would be what I call the 1957 scenario for 2019. What happened in 1957 was that the military-dominated government of Pibun Songkram held an election early that year, was deemed very corrupt, but the army commander, a very strong army commander, like this army commander, began to distance himself from Pibun, and in the end, carried out a coup in September of 1957. So yeah, we could see a switching of hands in terms of junta leaders. Will that lead to more democracy? I don't know. We can argue that General Grit Sivara in 1973 was a rather progressive, or not, somewhat progressive army general. But I don't think Apirat, the current army commander, is very progressive. So ultimately, no, I have to finish. I would say it is a foregone conclusion that one way or another, this tainted election will most likely allow the little m, which is the military, to persist in dominating Thailand as the junior partner of the big M, which is the aristocracy, and what we might call khaki-stocracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned Grit Sivara, who was a relatively progressive army general at the time, right? What happened to Grit Sivara? He died reportedly because he choked on sticky rice and mango. Very suspicious death for such a progressive army general. So, maybe, yeah, right? Right, so I'm Chianai. Hello everyone. I've been a member of this wonderful community for some time now, but this is the first time I speak as a panelist. And I thank Khao for giving me this opportunity to be here. I actually wrote 2 drafts for this talk. The first draft was rejected out of concern for security and safety. But I will share the draft with anyone who buys me beer at the bar later. So, all right. So as the introduction goes, I'm a reporter for Khao. I've been working for Khao for 7 years now. as a politic news reporter. But this is the first time I'm going to be covering a completed election, so it's something new for me too. You know, working as a journalist is a bit kind of like doing a magic show. I mean, it's all dazzling and all that, but once you know how news are made, once you know what happens behind the scene, you probably get a bit disillusioned. I don't know if people know this, but this election, like any other election, there's a lot of restrictions and limits to what the media can do, at least Thai media anyway. And so I would call that a pitfall. These rules are a pitfall. Since the talk here tonight is called Prospect and Pitfall, I'm going to talk about pitfall. Yeah. First, there's a rule on how much you can report. It doesn't mean you can report anything, even if it's about the election. For example, there's already a rule in place right now. You can't report about opinion surveys 7 days before the election takes place. That means right now we can't report about the poll. We can't report about the opinion surveys already. And you can't report about political activities or news about political parties campaigning after the midnight of March 23rd, before the election. So suppose Suthep Thuksuban walks down Sukhumvit naked and canvassing for votes, you wouldn't be allowed to report that because that's a strict rules.
Did you get a tip off about that?
Probably best for everyone actually. And don't get me started about exit poll. I'm not sure if other countries had this, but Thailand usually had this something called exit poll, which is basically asking people, as they leave the polling stations who they vote for. But you can't predict, you can't publish the poll until the election is over. And all these measures are designed to allegedly, protect the public from misleading or being misguided. And and announcements like Khun Paul has said, and now the announcement, the verifications of the election results won't be in until May, and I doubt that the media can do much to speculate, on the outcome of the election, because of these strict rules, completely strict rules that imposed by the the election commission. And there's also rules on advertisements. I'm not sure if this is a common knowledge, but if you're a political party, you can't just advertise on TV and radio. The election commission will give you allotted time. They will tell you the time and space where you can run your ads, and you can't run more than 10 minutes, I think 10 minutes for each party. And there's also a restriction on what you can say in those ads. It's very different to how elections is done in the West. For example, there's even a rule that political parties in their, we call it spot khosana, like these commercials, advertisement. You can't incite division in your country. That's one rule. And the other is you can't patping or reference anyone or any agency in your political ads. So just little politicians can do in the election. They can't even speak their own mind, right? And you might also notice, and this is my actually favorite knowledge, in the West, especially in the US, I believe newspapers and news agencies can sort of declare, who they supported. They support Trump or they support Hillary Clinton, whatever. But in Thailand, you probably noticed we don't do that. Editorials cannot publicly declare, who they support. This is an indirect effect, actually, from another rule set by the Election Commission that says, and I quote, political parties cannot use the media to influence the outcome of the election. So suppose that, say, Khao Sot English, for example, we had it, actually, Khao Sot Thai has an editorial about saying, oh, let's vote for Communist Party. What's going to happen was the Communist Party going to be under investigation by the EC, whether they have used Khao Sot in any way to influence or try to persuade the public to vote for the Communist Party. That's the reality that we're living here today. And which is funny, right? Because if you know Thai media, and many of you have been here for a long time, if you know Thai media, every Thai media agency has bias. Even Khao Sot has a bias. I mean, if you look at the way we're reporting, I think you can see the bias too. But here's the thing. But you cannot as a media, you cannot make it clear to your readers, you know, who you vote for or where you stand because of these strict regulations from the Election Commission. And these rules turns the media into hypocrites. You know, they try to have this cloak of, you know, neutrality or whatever, but no one can be completely neutral, you know, if you're in the media in Thailand. And it's funny, right, that these attempts to silence the politicians is also ending up silencing the media in Thailand. And trust me, if you know Thai media, right, and Kun Jonathan can speak for me here, if there's any gray area or something that they have a question, like, is this going to be against the Election Commission laws? Is it going to be against regulations? They're going to always err on the side of caution. Basically, you are imposing self-censorships over the media in the election season. And to be fair, this is not new. Previous elections have been under these regulations as well. It's the same for every election. But, you know, we're living in a time when the military junta has complete control over the election commission. And you're gonna, I mean, allegedly, reportedly. But, so a lot of people are gonna wonder, are these rules being enforced, you know, fairly? Are these rules being enforced in favor of the certain political party? And to be fair, these rules were all designed to protect the public from, you know, the big money political parties or smear campaigns. We all know how political campaigns can be nasty. And these rules were written to protect the public from that in the first place. I could see the good intention behind it, but in practice, Thai society has changed a lot from the time when these rules were written. And I'm sure that Thai society, you know, can think for itself and doesn't need, you know, this kind of protection any longer. I understand that the relationship between the media and election in the West is a contentious or controversial issue at best. You know, there were accusations that the media failed to understand what was going on. There was accusation of the media, you know, falling into this bubble. But it all means, you know, giving freedom doesn't automatically mean it's going to be good enough, like good election coverage. It doesn't guarantee that. It doesn't mean, you know, when the media had full freedom, they're going to function, you know, properly as they should. But a solution for Thailand, I believe, you know, Thailand has a unique problem about weak media institution. And if you go to the website of TJA, the Thailand Journalists Association, they actually even tell you to always respect the rules handed down by Election Commission. There is no large scale, I think, to my knowledge, there's no large scale opposition from the media, you know, to try to question these rules. And so Thailand has a very weak media institution. Everyone living in Thailand knows that. And I think the solution for that is to let them, you know, publicly and openly say what they want to say to the public. I think that would be a good idea to Thailand, and I hope the regulators of the next election, I don't know when that would be, next election, you know, they will heed my call and have a bit more freedom for the media institutions. So that's my wish. I know, you know, as a reporter, I shouldn't be making, you know, like demands or how to call it again?
Feel free.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, give me your list. I
could expand that a bit in the Q&A, you know, why I think the media should have the rights to really report the elections as should be. But so that's all my take for my talk. Yes.
Thanks very much. Look, that was a lot of ground covered, and obviously there's a great deal more one can say about this election. It is very unusual. Anyone wants to ask a question, if you can, please, of any of the panelists, identify yourselves and who you want putting the question to. I was going to say, I think there's a mic up there. I can't see it at the moment, but I think Tam's holding it. So if you want to ask a question, the microphone is just being put in place now. Line up. If you're still pausing for a moment. Perhaps I could just throw a question myself while I hear everyone else think about what they want to say. Chris, I wanted to ask you actually, and start with you, which is, I mean, do you see that the Thailand's political culture has matured over the last 20 years? I remember the first election when Thaksin was elected, and I was struck by even then how sophisticated his arguments were and how people understood, the attractions of his policies, how far ahead he was, at least of other Southeast Asian countries. We've been through so much turmoil, we focus very little on elections. But when you actually look at the electorate and how they respond to political parties now, do you feel that it's much more mature?
I think, yes, I mean, enormously. That what happened, that in the elections up until 2001, people were very much voting for their local candidate, and which party he happened to belong to was sometimes very secondary. The only difference from that was that there was a tendency towards the Democrat Party in the South that largely came about because 2 or 3 people from the South, particularly Chu and Lik Pai, became very successful in national politics. But things were still really quite localized. But what happened to some extent in 2001, and even much more in 2005 and 2011, is that people voted very much by party. And you saw in the map I put up, I mean, how starkly they were divided geographically, but also in each of those areas, the dominant party was winning by a mile, right? In the South, the Democrats would win, 80-20, and in the Northeast, Pheu Thai would win 70-30, right? And so the constituency after constituency were the same. So this showed it couldn't have been local affairs. It wasn't money politics, even though everyone said that's what it was. You wouldn't get that kind of result if people were voting by local reasons and were voting because some people were putting 2 red notes in their hat. So I think in that sense, yes, it became much more sophisticated in this time. And that's partly how, and also I think what also happened was that we saw that these old sort of godfather figures, which were very much dominant in these local politics, what happened to them? Well, actually what happened was they sent their sons to get MBAs in the USA. And they came back and took over. But they are much more sophisticated than their fathers were. And they play party politics game in a different way. So it's same, but different, and different in an important way. So this is why I think this election is very unpredictable. And I think the way Paul has set it out, where these goddamn soldiers are going to win, hook or crook, one way or the other, I think maybe, because I think what we do not know, and nothing that we have heard in polls or debate, you've seen all these newspapers coming out and predicting what the result is, and how are they doing that? They don't have any data. They're just doing it after, they're talking to their local competitors and they're blue skying, you see. So, and I think this is why I, talked about these possible reasons that may affect people's voting. And remember that after this last period, when the military stepped into Thai politics in 1992 and made a mess of it, the military became very exposed. And we know, in sensible militaries all over the world these days stay out of politics, because you know that it puts you under tremendous pressure and makes you very vulnerable to having the politicians come after you, cut your budgets, do all kinds of things. And after the events in 1992, which were much worse than anything we've heard now, because the soldiers shot at people in the streets, soldiers were being spat at on the streets, And after that, Kunanan swept all of the top brass out of their positions. It was a kind of purge. And that is the consequence of military becoming too involved in politics. So what we don't know, and what no one would ever have said out loud right now, is, I'm going to vote against the military because I hate them. No one is going to say that out loud. And we don't know how strong such a feeling might be. Now, we can't overdo it, because what we also know, and I don't think anyone of us has mentioned this, and I think it's very important, there is still a very strong conservative trend in Thai society, and particularly within the Thai middle class, who will settle for stability and peace and order. And that, of course, is what the military offered. And until they started panicking recently and offering all kinds of things, I think their strategy at this election was quite good. They were saying, if you vote anyone else in, we will go back to 2013, 2014. We'll go back to burning Central World and all this sort of stuff, right? And I think that was quite a good strategy to raise this fear which excites the conservative sympathies. So that's still there, so you shouldn't overdo it. But my major point is we really don't know what's going to happen, and that's why it's so exciting.
Thanks very much, Chris. First question, please.
My name is Matthias Peer. I'm a correspondent for the German business newspaper Handelsblatt. Thank you very much for the interesting presentations, and it was very insightful. I would like to speak with you or ask you about a possible scenario, although you say, Chris, that we don't know what is going to happen. My scenario would be, what if Palang Pracharat gets barely enough votes to re-elect or to elect Mr. Prayuth as a Prime Minister again? How difficult would it be for this government to actually pass laws in the lower house against a majority in the lower house? And I would also be interested to know whether you think it is likely that there would be a no confidence vote against Prayuth immediately after, or more or less immediately after he will be elected. And another question on this topic would be, what would happen after no confidence vote, after a successful no confidence vote? Would there be new elections, or would the whole process of the Senate and the lower house voting together for a new Prime Minister, would that start again?
Thanks very much. I think that's something that's been on a lot of people's minds. I'm not sure whether we've got the technical expertise to know as to whether a government formed with the Senate, which of course Palang Pracharat could do that with just 126 seats, could actually function as a government. And I think Thai Rak put an article out the other day saying they could find a way around passing laws and budgets even without commanding control of the lower house. I don't know if any of the panelists actually know what works in that circumstance. I would say I think all the predictions I've seen suggest it's very unlikely Palang Pracharat will even get the 126 seats on its own. We don't know, but nothing suggests that. They'll be lucky to get 80. I think you probably stumped us a bit in terms of parliamentary procedure. It's a commonly suggested scenario that even if Prayuth can become Prime Minister, there is a question about whether he can govern because the Senate can't take part in day-to-day government.
I think there's a sort of twist on that as well. That remember when we're talking about Pracharat, we're talking about Pracharat and its allies being able to garner 126, and they may actually have only a small part of that, because I think these local parties are going to get quite a large number. And of course the Democrats will do what the Democrats always do. So, but I think there's a twist that's possible there. If you like, there's still almost a working coalition, but Palang Pracharat has done very badly. Ditch Prayuth and get another candidate.
I think we've seen that in the comments from both Abbasid and Anutin.
Yeah, who looks like a fresh face. Not them. No, an outsider.
I thought Abbasid was actually gunning for the job himself. But
yes, I know.
And actually, don't forget that it's all.
Yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
Just wanted to add you can see if that did happen, that Prayuth's party was somehow able to make that threshold of 126 seats with the 250 senators, then you could look back into Thai history and see something that similarly happened in 1969, that the government of Thanom Kittigajon and his military proxy party had to rule with a lot of opposition in the lower house, a lot of it among their own factions. And the chaos of that lower house, the fact that the Thanom could hardly even pass a budget, finally led Thanom to lead an auto coup against his own government. And think about Prayuth's mannerism. His attitude is not somebody who would be patient with the lower house. So I can imagine that he too would lead an auto coup again. So that's my response to it.
Exactly, and don't forget that it depends on spines of politicians in the parliament as well. When Junta, right, became outside the prime minister in 1992, the Democrats, stood up against him in parliament and on the streets. But we're not sure, how politicians in this era are going to act, and who knows who might order a coup, if Palang Pracharat has a chaos in the house. And we haven't discussed this scenario yet, that there is this one factor, beyond our understanding that can also launch a coup. So
this is the nameless party.
The nameless party, yes.
Nameless party.
The
third hand.
Yeah, many sources say that the Palang Pracharat will win just like not more than 60 seats. So it means that it needs, allies. And one other thing is that when it needs allies, it means that the Democrat Party. But the opposite, has already said that he doesn't support Prayuth. So it means that it may be a coalition between Palang Pracharat Party and Democrat Party, but with the Prime Minister with somebody else, not Prayuth, because Prayuth is not popular among the supporters of the Democrat Party and even a Palang Pracharat Party. So it's likely that you have like the coalition between the Democrat Party and Palang Pracharat Party plus other parties, but with someone else as a Prime Minister, not Prayuth Chan-ocha. But the second thing that we need to keep in mind is that although Prayuth, himself will select the Senate 250, it doesn't mean that he will take absolute control over the 250 senators. So, at least 100 of them. And what will happen is this: if the turnout is high, and the majority of the people send a signal that what the government or what kind of politics or what kind of democracy they need, I think at least 100 of the senators need to think twice about this. And the third thing is that although you have the Palang Pracharat plus Democrat Party and other parties form the government, but what will happen in the parliament will be chaotic. Think about you have like someone like Seri Pisut in the parliament, and you have so many people. So it means that the new government will not last long.
Next question, please.
Chris Bruton, member of the club. I came to Thailand in 1968, so I went through one military regime of Tanom and Prapat. We used to call them Laurel and Hardy, the silly man and the fat man. And now we have the grumpy man and the watchman. And so in between there, we've had a lot of people dead in the streets and a lot of coups. What I want to ask is how long is it going to take before Thailand manages to become a real democracy?
How long have you got?
Without military influence. But secondly, is it desirable? Democracy seems to be going out of fashion in the world, and a lot of countries don't really seem to have it any longer. I mean, like the US and UK. So are we really looking for the wrong ideal in what we're talking about tonight? Thank you.
Well, we're not going to quote you Winston Churchill about the merits or demerits of democracy. What does the panel think?
I think the answer to the first part of your question is 3 years, 8 months, and 14 days.
Anyone want to take bets?
Can I just say one more thing? I think one answer to your question could be that if we look today, civilians are still, or rather disunited. I mean, they're united in the fact they want change, but there's disunity still in terms of change with what. And so I think until there is a lot more cohesion among civilians and more division at the same time by the military, then we're going to see the possibility of a change. While the military remains cohesive, I don't think it's as possible.
I think what we have been witnessing over the past 5 years is, the restoration of the conventional political order with, the military as, a key, mechanism. And to ask for how long Taiwan will be, becoming a democratic society, I think, first of all, we need to think about how to take, the military out of the politics in the first place. But remember this, actually, the military, lose its credibility in Thai society, as I said earlier, since 1992. But the reason why, it has like legitimacy to enter the Thai politics is because there's the division in society. And a critical part of society demand for the military election. Even Thammasat University, you know what happened? They marched with a banner asking for the military election. That's Thammasat University. That's why it has legitimacy to intervene in. So it means that, as Paul said, if we are still divisive, there's still a chance that the military will, intervene, in politics. So it means that, we need to be disillusioned about this. We need to, believe in like a democratic system or in the election or something like this. So this is perhaps the first step that we, take the country back and get rid of the military out of the politics.
Tony, you had something to say?
Right. I'm actually interested in the latter part of your question. Is democracy even ideal for Thailand? There was this one debate between Thanathorn and Pisit that really, for me, is really memorable. Thanathorn said, a country cannot progress, cannot develop without democracy. And then Pisit shot back that, look at Singapore. You wouldn't call democracy, you wouldn't call Singapore a democratic country. I've come to believe that you can either choose enlightened dictatorship like China and Singapore, or you can choose, liberal democracy like the West. But those two systems have one thing in common. Both have check and balance its own way. China and Singapore, they wouldn't let, dimwits like Prayuth to be prime minister. They wouldn't do that. They have their own sort of mechanism to select only the brightest, the most reliable person to be the head of their government. Liberal democracy, as you know, had check and balance as well. And Thailand, you can't just go the third way. Whether you choose dictatorship or democracy, there had to be check and balance. And I don't think this kind of dictatorship has that. I don't think so.
Next question, please, Mike.
Thank you. Michael Mackey, freelance, and I will volunteer to be Britain's enlightened dictator. I think I'm the only person who can do it. What I have is one question specifically for Paul Chadwick. Paul Chambers, what about this counter-argument that rather than this being the point by which the military can restore what it would like, it actually bites off more than it can chew? Because one of the themes that I want the rest of the panel to comment on is, when we had the women here on International Women's Day, the woman from the Democrats, this was interesting. She said one of the questions that comes up a lot when she was out canvassing was young men asking her about the abolition of conscription. Is there a sea change going on within the electorate that could see conscription abolished or restricted? But first, my question to Paul about what about this argument they're biting off more than they can chew, and they don't know it? That's the scary thing.
Yeah, good question. Well, I think that this faction of the military that is leading the junta is the faction which doesn't buy in to this notion that the military's image was tainted after 1992. And as such, Prayuth, Prawit, Anupong, they want to somehow, entrench themselves in power for a long time. But as I said in the very beginning, there are these rising expectations that the military hasn't really counted on, such rising expectations. Social mobilization, political participation. In fact, yes, they could be trying to bite off more than they can chew. But it's because they cannot corral and control a high level of rising expectations. People really want change in Thailand. Now, there's disunity about exactly what path of that change, but they do want change. And if the military thinks they're simply going to be able to, you know, stage manage this, to have a spectacle and control people's aspirations and keep military power, political party in control, well, they're in for something. But I do think that for the short term, military thinks they can handle this. What there would probably have to be, and I hate to say this, for a big change to happen in the military would have to be another tarnishing of its image, another tainting of its image, like what happened in 1992. To some extent, what happened in 2010. There would have to be something like that, and a uniting of civilians to get the military out of power. And then we can address conscription, then we can address other issues. Actually, this has happened before. After 1973, people in Thailand really wanted to see changes in military power. And at that point, there was an army commander who did want to see some changes too. So this is not the first time in history, but it would be very important, I think, that there would have to be some sort of cataclysmic event to taint the image of the military.
Thanks very much. David, next question, please.
Dave Kendall from the Bangkok Post. I have a question, a constitutional question. There seems to be a fairly widely held view that liberal democracy is not possible under the 2017 Constitution. Does the panel agree with that? And what, if so, what is the roadmap to amending the Constitution? We have Pheu Thai wanting to amend it immediately. Future Forward the same. Abhisit says the Democrat Party wants to amend it gradually. How can that actually happen, given there are 250 senators not likely to agree with that?
Panel? Yeah. Anyone? Go ahead. So, is liberal democracy possible under this constitution? What's the roadmap forward?
I think if you ask anyone, even supporters or critics of this constitution, they would say no, it's not possible to have liberal democracy. You have all kind of unelected powers over the elected government. Even the people who support the constitution, that's the whole point. They want liberal democracy in that country. And I also, Dave, I'd like to add that. But if you look, very closely, if you look at the root of what you call liberal democracy, previous constitutions in Thailand do not match the universal concept of liberal democracy anyway. Because as long as you have sections in the constitution saying that certain faction or certain institution has to be revered without question, that's not definition of liberal democracy anyway, and it goes back a long time.
Very good. Just to add, if you look at some theories of democracy, you can find 5 dimensions of liberal democracy, right? First, there's an election, right? Then there's political rights, like the right to demonstrate or something. Then there's the rule of law, right? Then there's checks and balances. And then finally, there's supposed to be this effective power to govern. And that 5th part means that elected civilians can govern and not be intruded upon by some non-democratic party, such as the military or some higher entity. And so is Thailand a liberal democracy under this constitution? No, not by that definition. That's definition of Wolfgang Merkel and Larry Diamond. They're not. It's not. It's a democracy, yes, but it's a sort of defective democracy. Can amendments be made to change that? Well, no. To change that.
Chol, your question, please.
Hi, Chon Thanatkan Thanarut, BK Magazine, and first-time voter as well. I have one question. How reliable or legit is the Thailand Election Commission at counting votes or holding this election, at all? because like I just voted for the first time this previous Sunday, and there was a lot of dodgy things happening as local news have reported. So yeah.
Yes.
So how effective is the Gogoto?
I mean, it'd be fair to say that the failings of previous election commissions have never compromised the overall result, have they?
And actually, even two commissioners, right? If you remember, in 2006, before the coup in April, there was this election, snap election, and the election commission at the time, they messed up by putting voting booths in the wrong direction.
Oh yeah.
Right? The voting booth had to be, right? Suppose I vote, then there had to be like a barrier here. But the election commission at the time, they turned this way. And just for that, two election commissioners go to jail for that. That was a very big thing. And
quite long sentences too.
Yes,
a few years.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but you know, in history, you know, in the past for several years now, election commission is something, you know, a bit sacred. Even, you know, you can't compromise and all that. But it seems like the election commission of this time, this era, and you know, my talk, you know, involved what election commission tell us not to do as well. It seems like they can do whatever they're pleased, right? And I wonder why that is. It's almost like some powerful figures backing them and telling them, you know, they'll be, you know.
But they haven't done everything that the junta wanted, have they? There have been certain things they've backed off. It's not as though they're just following their master's orders.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cruel joke, right? Yeah, the cruel joke, right? That 1997 constitution, you know, like created these agencies like the NACC, the EC, as independent agencies, meaning they're outside the government, you know, they operate on their own. But it's a cruel joke that these agencies are now appear to be used by a certain entity to advance its own goals, and I think that's a very, very sad thing, you know, for Thailand.
But it's fair to say, traditionally in Thailand, even in elections that are sort of highly contested and controversial, the basic process of voting, the integrity of ballot boxes, the integrity of the count, is usually regarded as quite good.
Exactly. We're not like North Korea, you know. I mean, but not yet anyway.
Not yet.
but apparently, Kun Chao, under the laws, you can file complaint against the election commission. You know, if you ask Kun Sisuwan Janya, he does it like every week. You can, you know, ask him for consultation, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Petra Destova, and I'm from the University of Leeds. I wanted to really ask about perhaps comparing the 2014 and the current poll, so the annulled one. The election in 2014 wasn't necessarily violent in a real sense of the word, but the levels of intimidation were quite high, and you know, even I would say unprecedented in the history of Thai elections. A lot has been happening in order to sabotage that election, so that in the end the election can be annulled based on very sort of flimsy technicality that it couldn't happen all in one day. Do you think something like this could still happen in the run-up to this election, that perhaps, you know, things could be let to happen or could be helped in some ways in order then there could be some sort of technical problem that can be used to annul it afterwards? Thank you.
Yeah.
Could there be any comparison? I think with the two elections that were annulled were the 2006 and 2014. Both of those were elections called by the pro-Thaksin side to their advantage, and both of them were boycotted by the Democrats. And in case of 2014, of course, there was active intimidation. Is it possible in this election?
So far, I don't think that's going to happen, because judging from the way in which almost all of the leaders who took to the street, you know, they turned themselves into the politicians. You know, for example, you know, yesterday you have us, and it's very interesting to, you know, to see, you know, all the leaders of the UDD, the religious movement, who became the members of the Thai Raksa Chart party. And after the Thai Raksa Chart party was disbanded or dissolved by the Constitutional Court verdict, rather than, you know, taking to the street, they, you know, became, you know, they transformed themselves into a, you know, a political campaign group, and they launched the political campaign in support of the political party, you know, in the competition. So it's likely that, you know, nothing like, you know, happened in 2006 and 2014 will happen again. And even yesterday, Suthep, he gave an address to the, attendees saying that, please come, to vote as many as possible. This is what he, sent the signal. So things like 2000 and 2014 is not likely to happen.
He suddenly believes in elections again.
Yeah.
I'm not as optimistic as Ajahn Anusorn though. Remember, at because it might be because of tape. Could be because he's confident that Prayuth is going to win. Maybe right now, business is confident he's going to win. In 2014, certain political factions boycott the election because they are very confident they're not going to win. And remember, it's something very strange, right? Election will be held on 24th March, but the results will not be sort of endorsed until May. A lot of things could happen in those months. Sure. In 2011, it took only 2 weeks for the EC to endorse the result and name Yingluck as a prime minister. And just imagine this. This Friday, Thaksin's gonna be at his daughter's wedding in Hong Kong. People from Pheu Thai and Thai Raksa Chart and Pheu Chart is gonna be there. Who knows? Just because they met Thaksin in Hong Kong, probably it might construe as cobngam or being dominated by people outside the party. So I'm not as optimistic as Anusorn. They tried before. I think they're going to try it again.
Sure. I'd ask Thaksin about the timing of his daughter's wedding, but I presume he planned it a long time ago. The next question, please.
Thank you. Yusuf Aboud, private investor. I just want to quote what the Bangkok Post quoted today, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Somket. And my question is to Chris Baker. I'm confident the country will move forward if stupid people don't cause any problems. So obviously they're scared about the outcome of the election. And this came yesterday from Dr. Somket, who is the Deputy Prime Minister. If I look at the stock market as a good leading indicator of the outcome of the election, which usually in most markets and even in Thailand, sometimes, most of the time is a good leading indicator. That's where the smart money usually bet on the outcome of the election. The last few days, the outcome of the election, well, if I want to assume that the elite here or the smart money is, if the market go up, they're favoring Prayuth will come back, the military in a form or another. For the last few days, the market has been going down because they're afraid, they're betting the outcome may not be in favor of Prayuth, in line what you said regarding, especially after the Sunday election. Now, today the market rebounded sharply, and the regional market went down actually. So this could change over the next few days. By Friday close, especially the set 50 futures could be a leading indicator what would be the outcome. That tells me that what you said, there's a possibility that the military is on alert. They're trying to do something in order to alter the outcome of the election in their favor. What are the possible scenarios they could do? Paul already mentioned some of these scenarios, but I'd like to hear your view, Chris. What are the potential scenarios that they could do to alter the outcome of the election, not nullifying the election?
Can the military cheat their way into power? Perhaps they already have.
I mean, I don't think the stock market investors have any privileged information. I think they're just as much in the dark as the rest of us. I think possibly the generals, the junta, they may have done some poll surveying, which we don't know about, which is had. But all of the stuff that's come out is pretty much nonsense. I mean, they're asking people like, who do you support as a prime minister? Do you want to be? But no one's going to vote for that, remember. I mean, it's a nonsense question. So I wouldn't place much stock on the movements in the stock market here. I don't think it's a particularly good signal. Quite frankly, if we got to a situation when the votes had come out where the Pracharat party and its allies were simply unable to form a government or put their man into power, I really don't know what they would do. I mean, I've absolutely no idea. But this is why I said there's all kinds of rumors about producing a new man into the picture to make things feel fresh. I think there's all kinds of things that happen. I think what Paul and Tony are talking about, I think there could be some kind of legal action to to mess up the result. I mean, all kinds of things can happen.
I think we safely assume, I mean, the coup was intended to finish off Thaksin, and it hasn't. The Palang Pracharat was created specifically to extend General Prayuth as Prime Minister, and they're determined that should happen, and the Constitution's been written to make that happen. If that isn't going to happen, then it's definitely going to be troublesome, though none of us can predict what kind of trouble that would be. The next question, please. I'm going to make this the second to last question, if that's all right.
Nigel Davis from the FCCT. Business is always part of the informal constitution of power. There are significant interests with sources of influence, resources of money and connections, and preferences. What can you say about how business has sought to use this influence in the course of this election campaign? What are their preferences, or maybe they're divided in their preferences? What impact might that have? And if there are a period
You're talking about big business here,
yes,
the really big,
highly,
the oligarchs.
absolutely right, highly concentrated centres of wealth now, very formidable, tightly controlled assets. And if there are a moment of fluidity or uncertainty after the election, and the political outcome was genuinely indeterminate, where would their interests fall, and what would they try to push for?
This is always the most intriguing question in Thailand. Where does the big business part of the power hierarchy, how do they exercise their power? Chris, you've written about it in the past.
Let Tony have a
If you go and look at the news about Palang Pracharat's, banquet at Muang Thong Thani, you're going to see a lot of big businesses at the top donors, and I think that's where we're going. Big business in Thailand has always, been fond of military or at least strong governments, and not to mention the fact that the real top number one business empire in Thailand, which people don't talk about, it's they seem to be on the side of the junta too, and I think that would help them last for a while. I think.
Chris,
you know what I mean?
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that there's very close relations between the big 4 or 5 of the conglomerates here and this junta. They have really worked very, very closely together. But I think one aftermath of the Thaksin era, when the businessmen came, to the forefront of politics, is that they realize that was a mistake, right? And so they will play their roles from the background. They won't expose themselves to public view and public comment. And I'm sure that they would prefer Prayuth and Pracharat to continue and take power. And what Somkit has been saying several times over the last few weeks, that, we're going to stay in power, is in many ways trying to assuage, make these guys happy, the big business happy, and particularly the foreign businessmen as well, So, I mean, that's very much his job. But in the end, you see, these big guys are so big, they can work with anyone, right? I mean, they are enormously powerful because of their enormous concentration of wealth. If the government changes, they won't be worried too much, okay?
Right, do we have a last question? Please, take the microphone. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Robin Ramcharan from Asia Center here in Bangkok. I guess I will address this to Paul principally, but maybe Chris could weigh in as well. Assuming there is an Indonesian model that might be followed, assuming that there's an Indonesian model that might be followed, could it be usefully taught in the Thai higher education system, and would it be useful?
Okay, I assume you're talking about, thank you. I assume you're talking about Indonesia with the fall of Suharto, right? Obviously, okay. Well, if Thailand can follow that Suharto incident, that means that all people or the majority of people would be coming together, uniting against the military, demonstrating all over. And you have to remember, during Suharto, of course, the economy was terrible. The economy here is not good. But there are still some divisions among civilians in Thailand. It's not reached this crescendo of unity like 1992. So there would have to be something like that. And I'm still waiting to see that. So until that happens, you know, we have to see. Also, the Suharto regime was very divided. There are divisions. There are divisions, clearly, in this regime. The army commander is not cohesively with the junta leadership. And there are others. I don't want to talk about all the others. So, yes, there could be an Indonesia future for Thailand. But until civilians become more united, at this point, I see either an Egypt future or maybe somebody like Anutin becoming prime minister in a very cobbled together government that the Democrats can agree to be part of, and that might not last that long. Okay, maybe that's the only other possibility. Chris.
And one of the most impressive things about the post-Suharto transition was the way they sterilized the military, which has been trying to come back, but so far has not really been able to assert itself. Again, it may be able to do in the future, but it was very, very impressive indeed, the way it was sterilized. I think we are very much under a coconut shell here in Thailand. And we sometimes forget that we are under the most abnormal, extraordinary government in the world, a government imposed by a coup. They used to be like this in the world in the 1950s and 1960s, but they all went away. And so Thailand is really the only one at the moment. And if we also remember, at the same time that the Thai coup went down in 2014, there was a coup in Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in the world. And civil society got together and overthrew it within a month, right? So, but here, it's really, extraordinary that it's this way.
So it's the Burkina Faso model we want, not
yes,
the Indonesian
but
model.
let me go back to my sort of generation change model. I think for a large number of the young people here who are citizens of the world, they're citizens of the world through the thing they hold in their hand every day, right? They know that they are living in this very primitive, extraordinary regime. And it must be kind of embarrassing to them at certain times. I think it's absolutely no coincidence that the Future Forward Party, who is appealing to this group, went out with its first thing to oppose the military. And I think that's because they know their constituency. I don't think this will happen quickly, right? I think it's going to take some time for this generation change to work through. I don't think it will be smooth, for exactly the reasons that Paul has been talking about. The army here is incredibly well entrenched. But I don't think this truly abnormal situation can continue forever.
Thanks very much. I'd like to wrap it up then and give a warm round of applause to our four panelists for a fantastic discussion. Can I just also say that once the election's over, we're still working on the details, assuming the country is still intact. And we will try to organise a panel very quickly afterwards, right after the election, and get some other great speakers together to look at what we know about the results. So do come. We'll let you know, OK? Thanks.